Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if you're on the West Coast. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Bonnie Lee, who is a registered counselor, therapist, and supervisor, family and couples professor, addiction and mental health at the University of Lethbridge professor, and she created a couples and family graduate course. She's been lecturing and speaking around the world. She was recently in France, in Asia, and in the Las Vegas conference. And we have her today to talk about family, couples, communication, and addiction. She has a relational approach to addiction, which is quite novel, and she created a model called CCT, which we'll hear a little bit about. Good afternoon and good morning, Bonnie. How are you?
Yes, good morning, Christian. Nice to be here with you.
So we've met actually in a behavioral addiction conference last year in Europe, and I admired your findings. You did some studies showing that uh, thinking about addiction in a relationship more holistic way actually gives better result. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Um, so at that conference, it's the International Behavioral Addiction Conference in Gibraltar last year, and I presented on this congruence couple therapy model that I developed based on the work of a woman pioneer in family therapy, Virginia Satir. And I further conceptualized her work and developed this four-door model. That means, it has four dimensions that are integrated to help people with gambling problems. And we also extended it to alcohol use disorder. And now we have an evidence base on that. Um, Christian was in the audience, and I could tell he was visibly enthusiastic about the model. He really resonated with it, and since then he has followed my work and participated in various groups that I run in learning this congruence couple therapy model, which is systemic. So a lot of addiction treatment is focused on the individual with the addiction symptoms. But very few models, actually look at the relational context out of which people developed addiction and what could be maintaining it, and the chronic stress that they're under because they don't quite know how to manage their life and communicate with other people who are close to them.
So,
So
yeah,
this congruence couple therapy model is putting the focus on communication and relationship and how to improve them to reduce stress.
thanks, Bonnie. We also welcome Mark, our co-founder, who has seen a lot of addiction and can talk about some of his cases. And maybe we can try to look together. How can we conceptualize, like you mentioned, addiction and repeated compulsive behavior as something that's not only with the individual, but that might come from the past. It might come from their desire to transcend, and definitely is relationship aspect. We know that if your relationship goes better, then your addiction goes less, and vice versa. It's a vicious cycle where when you're addicted, then your relationship goes worse and you're more addicted, right? So there's some link.
Mm-hmm.
And you found that if you look at perhaps, for instance, talking to couples together or talking to individuals, but taking care to think and talk about the relationship as an important factor, right? So Mark, do you have a case maybe that you want to share that Bonnie can give some advice that you want to share with the audience and with Bonnie?
Well, Bonnie, thank you again. And I apologize to both of you for being a minute late. I actually was seeing a client myself who is dealing with addictive behaviors. And so that's a perfect segue, I guess, into our conversation with each other. This client of mine obviously cannot disclose identity and have to remain anonymous here. He has been in a I would say, a toxic relationship, and one in which he is not getting a lot of his needs met. And so this client actually reverts to online pornography and goes into sex chat rooms, anonymous sex chat rooms, and finds this experience really exciting. But he knows that it's very shameful behavior. He feels very ashamed about it. And yet he cannot stop himself. He cannot stop the compulsion to repeatedly visit these chat rooms. And this is causing a lot of feelings of self-hatred, right? And he feels like he has no control, complete loss of control, because he keeps going into these sex chat rooms. And in these sex chat rooms, unfortunately, he's being exposed to a lot of traumatic material sometimes, things that he reports and things that he wishes he had never seen and he cannot unsee, right? And yet he still finds himself drawn again to them because they are somehow fulfilling one of his needs. So I'm really excited to talk to you and to hear your perspective on these things, because I think I can learn a lot from this as well and help this with my own clients. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, nice to meet you, Mark. And thanks for sharing that case. You know, in your description, it actually made me think of this wonderful movie by Steve McQueen, who was the director and producer. He's from the UK. And the movie is called Shame. And Shame. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, with
but
my husband. Yeah.
I love that movie. And actually, I wrote a paper on it. I think I called it using a cultural story to understand what sex addiction is about. So what you described was the cyclical trap of addiction, right? You know, you start to take care of some emotional needs and maybe emotional pain, and then when you're into it, it's very hard to get out because you need more and more of that substance or that behavior to get the same effect because the brain adjusts to it. Yes. So it's called tolerance, right? And you also mentioned, shame and self-hate, and that really erodes our core, it erodes our life force. So we lose our own natural energy for living, to find purpose, for find motivation. And once you're kind of into that trap, so the shame, makes you feel even worse. And then your brain needs more dopamine or, whatever chemicals to help you feel alive. You have to go to that substance or that behavior to charge up again. And so you are actually imprisoned in the addiction. And people who can't get out, and I've heard of even, teenagers thinking about suicide, because they're so trapped in that. And it's not easy to confide in somebody what you're struggling with. So it becomes a very vicious cycle. So in terms of the case you mentioned, if I were to work with this person, I would check about so what precipitated his use, what was the first instance when he started using porn? And today we found that children as young as 8 years old, they're exposed to porn, through their buddies, through their friends, maybe even like through sports. So it's really part of our culture and it's so normalized. So once you're exposed to it, and if your family circumstances were not ideal, like, if you have emotional struggles and you don't have anybody to talk to, you don't feel like you could talk to your parents, then it's so much easier to just go online, right? I mean, I tell people it's so much easier to reach for a cigarette or, a bottle than to talk to a counselor, because where would you find this person, or then talking to your parents, right? So they kind of fall into this cycle of using porn or using marijuana or, whatever substance or behavior to feel better. And initially, it's a great friend, right? It helps. But as I said, it has its own snares. You get caught up in it, and then you don't like yourself. Maybe you spend a lot of money on it. Who knows? But it's hard to get out. So what is missing in the first place is a more human way of dealing with these emotional issues, struggles that we all have, to have somebody to talk to about that. So that's a very important piece, to find out when this porn use started. Was it earlier in childhood, or was it just recently, with the relationship, the difficulties? So my guess is it goes back a little further. And so that you can work on reducing the porn use, but I think it's more important to look at what precipitated it in the first place, and is to meet these emotional needs. And we don't want to shame or stigmatize clients, because that also feeds into the negative cycle. And take a look at what his relationships were like, when he grew up, because that's how we formed our first relationships, and how we learn to communicate with others. And we all need safety, to speak from our heart and our mind, speak from the inside. And was it safe, for this person, or was it not safe? And in what way was it safe or not safe? So you might want to explore that. And then, also with porn, there is often other addictive behaviors, like we find, like with gamblers, a lot of them have drinking problems, or other substance use. So they're, what you call comorbidities. So we want to check into that, and the suicidal ideation. And then, as we progress in the therapy, I would then, put a spotlight on communication, like when he was a child, and also with the recent partner that wasn't working out for him. How do they talk to each other? And like in my therapy model, I have a typology to look at the different types of communication, which we could talk about later.
I wanted to add one more thing, which actually, with regards to this specific case, he actually grew up in a quite religious environment.
Mm-hmm.
And partly it's relevant because he was told that his sexuality is something to be ashamed of, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so coincidentally, a lot of the automatic thoughts that he has now are around him being a pervert or him being gay. He's bisexual, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And he feels a lot of shame around this. And I think it's partly fueled by this religious upbringing that he had, this stringent religious upbringing. I think that's something that definitely had a strong influence on his current cognitions.
Mm-hmm. That could be. And, people with diverse identities, they have a hard time finding belonging and being included in society or in family. So that certainly, it's something that could be feeding into the isolation, right? And then the messages, from his kind of religion, the kind of talk, and maybe there's not a lot of attention to emotions, to the human side, but it's more, maybe elevated to, just a certain creed or moral side of behavior. So, so he wasn't able to be a full person, to be himself, in that context. Yeah.
Well, we know, for instance, that there's so many studies that show that marginalized group or cultural minorities always have worse mental health
Yes,
outcome, more addiction.
definitely. Yeah.
And Mark, can you share? You mentioned toxic. I don't like the word toxic, as you might know, but like, what can you describe what he called toxic, or what was the relationship, and see it in the relationship lens as well?
I think that this individual in question is dealing with a lot of feelings of not being lovable or worthy, right? And he looks for reasons why his partner might not love him, and constantly feeling like he's not living up to the expectations of the partner. And then in previous relationships, that the girl he always wanted was never available for him, right? And that's always, it's a consequence of him. Nobody wants to date him, right? that's the belief, that's the story that he's really convinced himself by, and that's come to determine his relationships.
So you put your finger on something really important, which is self-worth, and self-worth is something intrinsic and universal to all of us. We all have worth. Actually, I tell my clients, even if they don't have a religious belief, because the Christian belief would say, you're made in the image of God. But, if you don't have that belief, all living things are beautiful. Actually, I asked them to think of one living thing that's not beautiful. So how can they be not beautiful, right? And I think finding that worth in himself, and it's not based on their actions, is based on who they are. And I think it's very important for a therapist or for relationship partners to see each other's real worth and what I call essential qualities. So I think we need to hear not only about problems and pathologies and symptoms, but we want to hear the strength in these people, the character, the light in them. So for example, there was one case of somebody with a gambling and cocaine addiction. And when you look at his childhood, there were huge traumas. He witnessed a murder. His father was put in prison, and he worshipped his father, and so that was a big loss to him. And then the mother badmouthed the father, and so it kind of created a lot of alienation in the family and also loss, right? So it's not surprising, he got into cocaine and gambling. But, he lost a lot of money. But after he had some treatment, he was determined to pay back the money he defrauded in his company. Yeah. And so he worked overtime for 3 years, to make up for the money that he owed the company. And that shows such integrity, like I have so much respect for this person, right? So I think we need to hear those stories, that other side of who they are, to help lift them out of this dungeon of self-hate and self-doubt.
Thanks for that story, Bonnie. I have also, a client that actually reached out to me after we did our porn addiction or corn addiction episode on the podcast, and so it's a relationship issue. This person is a male in his late 40s, married with 2 young kids, below 5 years old, and facing loss of intimacy. And then after watching the podcast, kind of said, well, maybe now I know why. I've been watching porn for the last weeks or months, 2 months, 5-6 times a day before going to work or this and that, right? And I can't stop. And then I see that it affects my relationship, and I don't know what to do about it, right? And so, for instance, he has shame of it, and then I'm trying to say that through the coaching we can go to a point where eventually it would be better if he can communicate that with his partner, right? And with no judgment and no shame, saying, well, this is affecting my relationship, it's affecting my self-worth. And how would you go about trying to make that bridge and give that person confidence that they can stop and they can rebuild the intimacy and relationship that they had?
So I might say, I think it's wonderful that there is this part of you that sees the downside of what you're doing, and how it's costing you. So it shows that there is an enlightened part of you, to be aware of that. So I would kind of affirm the self-worth there, and it's great that you want to take action, about that, and that shows your motivation. So you not only think about it, but you're actually doing something about it, and I would be really happy to work on that with you. And I think framing things as doing something together, it gives people hope. Because for many of these people who struggle with addiction, they have been on a long journey, most of their life. So, I'd be happy to work with you, or if it's a couple, let's work on that together, all three of us, So you insert yourself as a beacon of hope, working with them. So actually research did find hope is generated through having a vision of what you want to achieve, what your future is going to be like that you desire, and having the ability to get there, or the skills to get there. That's called self-efficacy in psychological language. And the third piece is doing it together with someone who supports you.
Well, yeah, we did find similar ideas, and we tried to incorporate this in what we do at AWE. Mark had a conference in Munich yesterday, which I also attended virtually, and we talked about accountability, right? So it can be accountability to yourself, but that's sometimes very difficult. It could be accountability to a coach, a therapist, a clinical psychologist, and also to your friend, your family, right? So when because you said a long road, but also an alone and often isolated road to deal with the shame. Oh, I did this behavior again. I want to change. I don't know how. I want to so much, but I cannot. And to bring accountability in the mix, I think is something you want to share, Mark, what you've been able to do with accountability with your
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think accountability, I literally have some clients of mine who will send me pictures of them at the gym, right? To know that somebody is actually watching out for them and counting on them to go. It's because, in cognitive behavioral therapy, you talk about, right, action plans and getting people to take, massive steps in their life between the sessions, because you only see a client for 1 hour out of 156 weeks or 156 hours per week, right? So you want to make sure that they're actually making tangible progress in their life outside of the therapy sessions. So how do therapists ensure that? Well, for one, I try to be very clear about what are some realistic expectations that we can have beginning therapeutic relationship together. And then secondly, what are realistic tasks that they could work on between the sessions? Those are things that are mutually agreed upon. And so one of the things could be, okay, I'm going to apply for 15 jobs this week. I'm going to go to the gym twice this week. And then understanding what's the big why. Why do you actually want to do these things, right? Why is this? This is the emotional component behind it. And so that's extremely important. And I think when it comes to things like digital addictions, the very nature of technology is isolating. It's alienating. People spend time alone, on pornographic websites, or they spend time alone swiping on Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, these dating apps when they feel lonely, because they think that technology can supplant their natural needs. But it does fall short in a lot of instances. And I think this is where CCT and it can be really helpful, because the addiction cycle starts to kick in when people feel isolated in these states.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your idea about doing work in between sessions, right? And then you might want to say, and then we can talk about it when you come in next time. So in between, they're actually taking you with them, like as if, I have to tell Mark about, how I have implemented what we agreed upon. So I think that's a really good way to keep the continuity, but it's also taking the therapist with you, like up here, the little therapist in your head. And I think in terms of steps that they take, as you know, in behavioral modification, you want to break it down into very small steps. Yeah, because if it's too big, then they're doomed to fail. They can't make such a big leap. So tiny steps. Yeah. And like with couples who want to be connected with each other, it's not like talking about the deepest, darkest secrets with each other or the deepest, darkest pain, right? But it's to maybe share a joy that they experience during the day and with each other. And that takes 10 minutes, and they can do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So that's very doable. Because a lot of families or couples have very busy lives. with children and dual income and all that. So, maybe take 15 minutes once or twice a week. So that's very doable. So I think it's important to make something doable or see what the client would consider doable and start with that.
Do you mind if I jump in and ask another question? So I have difficulty sometimes with patients who are in relationships because a lot of their problems revolve around something involving the relationship. And I'm not a couples therapist, right? I only see one person at a time. And I often tell them, right, I'm here to help you with the issues that you're dealing with. But unfortunately, your partner is not here and I cannot counsel them at the same time. So I run into this limitation of that my clients speaking a lot about their relationship and their partners, but it's only one side of the story, and I don't have the other person present. How do you deal with this limitation? And
right. Yeah, and you're right. It's much harder to work on communication and relationship when you only have one person in the room, because you only get one perspective and one description, and you don't see in real life, what's happening. So that's why I like working with couples, because instead of going by what they tell you, you see the movie. And counselors who work with couples tell me, when you work with an individual, it's like reading a book. Like you get the text, but when you work with couples, you get the video. You see it played out in front of you. So in that particular case, I think I might want to refer them, to somebody who is comfortable working with couples. And you can still work with one partner, and if the other partner needs some individual support, they can do that. So, you can work as a team that way. And what you see in a couple is how they interact and how they affect each other's behavior. So, your client might tell you, my girlfriend is always criticizing me, but then, when you put the two together, you notice that, the girlfriend might be criticizing, but your client might not be saying anything and makes the girlfriend really frustrated. And then she escalates in her criticism. And this person who is avoidant would retreat some more. So they feed into each other's behavior. So you have to work on both sides and help them change the way they talk. So I think Christian mentioned like communication, and this is called congruent communication, which means both people have to be able to express themselves and to open a space for the other person to come into the conversation. So you want to teach them to have this self-other conversation and balance out the communication, and you keep the safe space for them until they can make it safe for each other. And I think a lot of times people don't communicate, or they can use a superior posture, which means blaming, criticizing, or they can use an avoidant posture, like shut down, like walk away, go to the screen. And these we found to be the two most destructive postures, that create problems. And so you want to bring them back, to both self and other. And these postures, that are destructive, I'm trying to not use the word toxic because Christian doesn't like that.
Thank you.
These people, when they kind of go to some of these incongruent postures, it's because they don't feel safe with each other. So I think safety, helping them be safe, that means protect each other's self-esteem and worth. So it's really respect. Right.
And is there, talking about safety, worth, self-worth, is there also a physical, neurological component, right? Because there's a psychological safety, which is,
yes,
do you hear the words? But also there's an interpretation, right? So someone might want to make the partner feel safe, yet the other person doesn't see it as safe, right? And we know that we have the amygdala that might have more fear or anxiety, and we might have dysregulated nervous system that sees something as a threat when it should feel like safety, or it could feel like safety, right? And we know, for instance, that mindfulness and other things can help their nervous system regulate. We know that, for instance, if your partner is in distress, hugging them from the back is less threatening than confrontational, or sitting side to side instead of front to front. So there's a lot of other somatic, I guess, ways
Mm-hmm.
to kind of create that safe space, not only just by words, right?
That's a good point, Christian. So, communication is actually very complex, and you talk about, somatic component, but even prior to that, there's the sensory component. Like, eye contact is important, but maybe too much eye contact could be threatening for some people and some cultures. So, you have to find out, what feels safe to the person, or they could tell the other person what feels safe. But generally, good communication has to have some degree of eye contact, because when you look away, it's a kind of disconnection, and you don't know if the person is regarding you, or talking to the wall, you see. So
Mhm.
so I think eye contact, some degree of it, is really important. And now, there's this polyvagal theory about how actually, our nervous system, maybe subconscious, is called neuroception. We're always scanning the environment for safety because it's a survival thing, and we're always scanning it. And if in your early life you experience some danger, or lack of safety, or assault or something, you're heightened, in terms of what signals you pick up that indicate lack of safety. And that's not even at the brain level, it's at the gut level. Yeah, and the polyvagal theory talks about the vagus nerve. And there are two branches to it. One is dorsal. So when you feel when the neuroception picks up something is not safe, maybe loud voices, or like a frown or something, or somebody pointing the finger, you can immediately shut down and play dead, and not engage, because it keeps you safe that way. There's such a primitive, actually, I would say reptilian adaptation. And then we have to, as you say, mindfulness, learn to find safety in ourselves, but we might sometimes need somebody to help us find that safe space by being there with us, assuring us, or maybe giving us messages we can internalize to say to ourselves, this is okay, or I can ask for a break right now and come back to the conversation later. So managing safety is really important.
Thanks, Bonnie. Yes, we are familiar with the polyvagal theory, and thanks for explaining it to the audience from the maybe most well known as fight, flight, or freeze
Yeah.
response. Right. So
Yes.
freeze is when the dorsal vagal, and there's also the ventral, which is better. And
Mm-hmm.
we actually find that there's a study that says 23 minutes of mindfulness, of reset, of letting so it could be included breath work, makes a difference in bringing back that state. And there's other things like acupuncture, like physical things that can help you reset, right? So there's many ways to reset your nervous system, and it's something that sometimes therapists and clinicians forget, that there is this real physical component to it. It's not
Mm.
just pure CBT, pure cognition. There's also a physical
Yeah.
thing that helps you feel safe, right? And we,
Yes.
we try to incorporate that because that's even better holistic way to see.
That's great. Yeah. Actually, I run a special interest group with the Couple and Family Therapy Association, and the special interest group is focused on trauma, relationship, and addiction. Okay, we call it the TRA group, or the Tra-la-la group. And so this fall, we're running 2 sessions, and it's very exploratory, and I called it the 3 sisters, the gut, the heart, and the brain intelligence. And actually, we communicate, like just up and down like that. The gut knows, when you're stressed, or when you perceive something stressful, even if you have thoughts that are stressful, the gut knows, right? Your stomach turns, or you feel queasy. And then the heart the heart has a lot of intelligence too, and when you ask people when they process their trauma or their pain, where do they feel it? It's always here. And then the brain actually interprets what it is, but it's a later part of the evolution. And I attended a talk on by a UK archaeologist on from cell to civilization, okay, in 2 hours. And I was very curious to see how she could kind of pack that in 2 hours in a lecture format and make it interesting and engaging. And it was totally worth it, because what I learned is, and she didn't say this, but I kind of extrapolated to how we actually embody evolution. The gut is like the fluid environment, the primordial life, the single cell organism. So the microorganisms are very important in the gut, and it's fight or flight. It's very instinctive, but there's a lot of information about survival there. And then the heart, that's the mammalian part of the evolution, like we start developing heart. And so that has intelligence too. And we're going to explore the heart this time, because the heart has memory too. There were some, I don't know if they were very rigorous scientific studies, but the heart has memory. And then the brain. This is the latest part of the evolution. So we embody evolution. So we're absolutely amazing to help us survive.
Great. And, I also have some qualms about people talking about the heart in terms of the emotions, because we know the emotions are in the limbic system. But there is some clear example of the heart being affected, having memory, as you mentioned. I don't know the scientific study, but we can even talking about the polyvagal theory that the way that the heart rate variability is an indicator of the health of your vagus nerve, right? So it's an indicator of your resilience to being able to go through a stressful situation, so your heart beats very fast, and then to come back to a calm state, right? So to have less long or intense period of stress. And there is also some physical way to help train the heart rate variability, including cold showers or cold bath, which I try to do once in a while. And people think I'm crazy, but it does help, and it helps increase your dopamine, and it increases your resilience, right? And there's also psychological ways to understand resilience and to reframe events as positive or as growth, with growth mindset versus fixed mindset, or internal locus of control versus external, right? So there's many ways, and it does reflect in the heart. So yeah, there is some science to it, even though many people use heart in kind of a romantic way, when the science was not up to date centuries ago. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, everything is connected, and we, as like neuroscience, psychology, therapy, we have to remember that the brain is connected to the rest of the body, right?
Absolutely.
It's not on its own. Like the human body is connected to their community and to their relationships. Same thing for internal, right?
Yeah, those are really good points. And you mentioned somatic. Somatic is really the heart and the gut, and when we heal, we have to pay attention to what the other signals are, from the heart and the gut. So that's really important. There was something I was going to say, but it kind of slipped my mind now. But continue.
Perfect. So we're talking about relationship and communication. We talked about addiction, gambling, gaming. I know we can come back to the gambling conference you went to in Las Vegas, and what insights you had about, for instance, online gambling and sports gambling that's on the rise, that was decreasing, but now on the rise. But just in terms of relationship, we saw how porn use can affect relationship in two different cases. But just the phone itself, right? So we've learned about the concept of phubbing, right? People ignoring themselves, being on their phone, avoidance that you mentioned, communication posture, right? So the phone is an easy way to avoid. Oh, I'm not looking in your eyes. You mentioned eye contact, right? Eye contact has drastically decreased in humanity since people are using their phone, right?
Right.
And what are your thoughts on how we could perhaps teach couples to acknowledge that technology has a role, either from porn, from gambling, from social media, right? You're trying to have a conversation with your partner, but they're scrolling, right? So where's that communication? Where's the connection that we see? That self-worth, that
Right. Now I kind of picked up on my lost thought. If I could just kind of go back
yeah,
to
please.
the somatic part for a minute. There is scientific evidence about the heart called heart math. I'm not totally familiar with that program, but they use biofeedback to help you monitor your heart rate, and it's an indicator, of how you're functioning, and how you can improve, your self-regulation. Um, uh, and the other part is, we kind of mentioned more individual strategies to regulate, but after we pick up these signals of distress or whatever, you're reaching out to another person. That's a really great way to regulate, because when talking to somebody, you get perspective, and the world is not just focused on your problem, or your problem is not the whole world. There's so much else going on. So having an external focus sometimes helps, rather than the constant rumination and self-focus. I grew up in Hong Kong, and somebody told me, Hong Kong actually, I don't know about now, but they had the lowest homicide rate, even though it has the densest population. And since somebody told me, you don't get too depressed in Hong Kong, because the minute you go on the bus, you start noticing other people and what they're doing. So, in a way, it really forces you to have this external focus. So that was that part about the heart and all that. Oh, and the other thing is, the reason the heart is so important, or an indication the importance of the heart is, it's in so much mythology, right? Especially like the sacred, in the Catholic tradition, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So it's very focused on the heart. Okay, so going to the phone. I think the phone has become an appendage. We feel a little insecure without the phone, and how to, but we can't live without the phone, because it's part of our culture now, and it's communication, but it's also safety in some instances, right? So yeah, we rely on the phone. It's important. And you mentioned the Las Vegas conference on responsible gaming that I just attended, and there were quite a number of sessions on framing prevention messages. What kind of message do you bring to people? And the no messages don't work too well. Just the war on drugs. Just stop it. As if it works, right? But respecting the social norm a little bit, and encourage positive play, like it's in gaming, positive play or positive phone use. And that means maybe, you can unwire during certain times of day, or maybe after dinner, you're not going to look at your phone, because it's family time. So, people can maybe make some decisions about when to detach from the phone, so the withdrawal is not going to be so painful.
Thanks for that. I think we agree in terms of, and we've seen that for drugs, for phones, saying no or having negative messaging or criterias is not really helpful, or it can just be helpful for a period. But we talked about meaning and purpose, right? We want to actually bring other things. That family could be meaning,
Yes.
Work, whatever
Right.
it is, sports,
Yeah.
arts, and which we call awe moments, as we can transcend and find like the flow, as we know, with the flow theory. I also think that if you think about the phone use as positive, right? To me, it means intentional, right? So it's like, how can we make our phone or technology use more intentional? Like, we're using technology here to communicate, to learn, to teach. That's intentional use, right? But if people find themselves scrolling or doing things and being stuck for hours because
Yes.
they don't recheck their intention, and it's not easy because those things are quite addictive, right?
Right. So the clients could start with some self-observation, like when do they use the phone, as a distraction, a mindless thing, or when do they use it kind of purposefully or intentionally that serves them? So, and then how they can eliminate that. And about the phone, I have an interesting story about a woman who approached me about falling out of love with her husband. And she said, I wonder if there's something wrong with me. I just don't have any more feelings for him, Um, so what can I do about it? So she kind of wondered about herself and kind of blamed herself. And she was kind of worried, like this lack of romance, lack of affection for, well, maybe there is affection, but lack of romance for her husband. So we did 1 or 2 sessions exploring, what's going on inside of her. Then I started asking, like, do you and your husband talk to each other? And she said, well, when I talk to him, he's always looking at his phone. Yes. And I think he needed that because he has ADHD, and also, when he talks, it would be about work and all that. And she's a stay-home mother. And she said, I don't have much to share. So I'm mostly the listener, So I said, do you have things you do together that you enjoy? And she said, well, he likes golf and I don't like golf, so we don't have much in common. So I said, well, what do you like? And she said, I like going for walks. Okay. So I said, well, could you make a request of your husband to see if he would go on a walk with you? But she never thought of making a request or asking. So that's the communication issue, right?
Yeah.
And then I said, maybe also at dinner, I have these communication cards that give people, like a prompt to share, like a joy or something, a piece of news, something at the dinner table. So she started doing that, with the kids and with the husband. And she started asking her husband to go for a walk. And she asked the husband to put down the phone when they converse. And then the next session, she thanked me and she said, well, Bonnie, thank you for pushing me, to ask my husband these things. And then she didn't have to have a follow-up session because things got so much better.
Wow. Thanks for the real story, how phone affect relationship and communication about,
Right.
whatever phone or technology you use. It's hard when you're in your mind, like you said, and you're trapped. And when you talk about it, when you communicate, when you admit that you might struggle, admit that you're not perfect, that you can do better, that we can improve, that we can reiterate. I think that's a very good example of success. By the way, if you're joining live on LinkedIn, X, YouTube, and you have any questions, please feel free to ask Dr. Bonnie Lee, who might have some help for your real life situations or your friends or your family. And Mark, do you have anything to add to this beautiful discussion?
Yeah, well, I mean, in my practice, I've dealt with a lot of clients who have addictive tendencies, and especially in the digital realm. One of them that comes to mind, quite severe, had a strong, not just pornography, but also an addiction to brothels and prostitutes, and he couldn't stop himself. And it got to the point where he wanted, I was meeting this client in person, and I literally traveled to his apartment to take the noose out of his hands that he was holding, and he wanted to use this to hang himself.
Oh.
And so it gets quite to extreme lengths when people are stuck in this cycle. And what I found very interesting about this client in particular was that he actually had a daughter. So he's my age, not too old, 32, but he has a daughter whom he met once, and he decided he didn't want to have a relationship with her, and he didn't want to have a relationship with the mother of his daughter either. This is somebody who I think has had narcissistic tendency and also a bit of bipolar disorder, but he's a software developer, right? And so he's constantly by himself most of the day in front of the computer, isolated anyways, feels like nobody cares about him, has this family or this daughter that's out there, but he doesn't want to form a relationship with her. And coincidentally, he falls deeper into this addiction cycle. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this specific case.
Right. Well, I think you described it very well. It seems like, he has difficulty with relationships, right? And it probably stemmed from way back, Like I always ask, tell me a little bit about how you grew up, and and how did people talk in the family to each other. So that would give you a lot of information. And what contributed to his, you said narcissistic and tendencies, and narcissists are focused on themselves. They don't open up a space for the other. We talked about the self-other balance. So why isn't he interested, in the daughter, or the wife? And pornography, or online addiction, or going to brothels, or that, those are pseudo relationships. They're not real relationships, but they could keep you safe because you're not putting yourself in there. You're just going through the motions. And but they don't really satisfy. So maybe what he really needs to learn is how to form real relationships, through communication. But that might mean peeling down the layers to find out, where was that fear, with that original wounding, that he suffered.
Well,
So that kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this was a client from a few months ago, and I don't work together with him anymore. But I remember talking to him about previous relationships that he had in his life, and whether he had been in love. And none of his, he had one instance of when he was in high school where he had felt deep feelings for his this girl, but other than that, he never felt loved, and he grew up in a very cold household. And he said that, like, going and visiting these brothels, it did give him some feelings of feeling like somebody cared about him, right? And
Yeah, right.
for him. And I think coincidentally, you see a lot of the trend nowadays with online pornography is towards these platforms like OnlyFans, and they have these relationships with these content creators. They're called parasocial relationships, actually. And so what a lot of men seek when they pay for these subscriptions is the girlfriend experience, right? They want to feel like this woman who they've only met over an internet connection is actually their girlfriend and cares about them and says, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm here for you." And they want that experience, right, of being in a relationship, because they've never had that in their life.
Right. So what he really longs for is really relationship, right? But relationships are not easy. You have to pay attention. You have to risk vulnerability. You have to learn communication. Yeah, it's not easy, but these pseudo relationships are easy, and they can satisfy for the time being, but they don't last, and they're not real, so in the end you're betrayed. So what does he want, the real thing or the pseudo thing? And yeah, so he has to make a choice around that, and it takes work. Relationships take work.
Well, what would you say to somebody, though, who feels like they don't have a choice, that they're so deep in the spiral of addiction that they feel a complete loss of agency over their actions?
Well, I think like you talked about hope, like they have to have a vision of what they want, so see if you could kind of bring out some of that. Like this person seems to have said, he wants to hear comforting messages, of, love, or sweetheart, like these, sweet words, that would make him feel treasured or valued. So maybe that's what he wants. So you might have to kind of, draw out what they don't say so clearly, but magnify it for them so they hear for themselves what they really want, and are you willing to start investing in that, like working on that road, and closing this one. So we all have a choice, and that's very important, like making a choice, and that's something we have as humans.
If I can add to that, and thanks for amazing comments and suggestions. There is, when people are looking for hope and looking for love, sometimes it's not possible for them to have that love through their relationship, partnered, romantic, children, parents, friends, right? And we're facing a crisis of isolation, right? So many people
Yes.
feel lonely and
Yes.
isolated, right? And we have also some techniques that we know work. There's not only mindfulness, but there's mindfulness self-compassion, or just self-compassion, or just compassion, right? compassion is such an important thing for yourself and for others. It's one of my keys to happiness: compassion, courage. And so showing courage, of being with a coach, a therapist, a clinician, that's already, well,
Mhm.
that's one step. I think we should always
Yes.
acknowledge that person is doing a step, is there's agency already from that point.
Yes.
And then to give them the ability to seek or find love from others. But before, I think we need to give them love back to themselves, right? So the practice of self-compassion basically is, you imagine that someone who loves you, or a friend that's there, you say something nice to them, and then you say that to yourself, right?
Hmm.
So,
Right.
and that can kind of give back a little bit of that self-confidence, to that person that might just don't feel it, don't have the resource, but you can teach them how to rebuild their self-worth through self-compassion practice, for instance.
Yes. I think that's very important, and as we said, self-worth is at the core of it too, right? How we view ourselves and building that up. But I think we need community. You talked about isolation, and it's really hard to find community these days. Um, so you like working on the relational front, maybe you can ask some of these clients, see if you can try to make contact with somebody in a real way, like look at them, take an interest in them, ask them a question, and not just how are you, fine, and you walk away. I'm running a listening workshop right now. I'm actually running 2 sessions of it, and people have to practice listening to other people. And it's only 5 sessions and we're almost done, and people have made such incredible progress. And I learned a lot about the dynamics of listening, because listening always involves two people, and so it kind of brings us to the relationship factor again. But people have to practice in between sessions listening to 3 people, and so they change their behavior, like Mark said, give them some work to do between and have them try a different behavior. So these people who are isolationists, go and talk to somebody and see what you learn about this person, but look at them and really listen to them and maybe repeat some of the words they say. It's as simple as that. So, but I would think we really do need to form community and bring people together. So I'm a supporter of um, um, AA groups or SA groups, like groups, those fellowships are very important to people. And maybe just one more point before we end, on the phone use. The phone offers so many products these days. It's not just porn, but, at this gambling conference, I learned how online gambling, sports betting, that has really risen exponentially. And in the US, they're very worried about college students gambling. And at the University of Mississippi, they set up a center for collegiate gambling. And in Canada too, like I've heard cases where people used up um, uh, uh, their student loans or their scholarship money in sports betting. And just because it's normalized now, you don't know that it has such a big risk. But they found people who do online gambling, um, their chances of developing a gambling problem are 3 times higher than those who go to a physical casino. And this online gambling really exploded since COVID. And now we have private operators. It used to be the case that the government regulates all these gambling venues and online gambling. But in one of our provinces in Canada, Ontario, they have engaged international private operators to put on these apps, online casinos, online sports betting, and there are layers of sports betting. It's not just the game, but by how many points are they winning? What do you think of the next game? There's maybe 5 or 6 different levels. So you're gambling all the time. You can be gambling all the time, and sports is such a cultural phenomenon. And um, and there was a study showing people who drink and bet at the same time, they bet more money and they bet more games. So they're at higher risk. Yeah. So I think
Thank,
we have to be careful about warning people about betting or gambling and not pairing it with alcohol.
And thanks for those statistics, and alarming, unfortunately. And you were also mentioning communities, right? So we have isolation, we have easy access to through the phone to so many things that can be addictive, including losing your relationship, losing your financial backing, losing your education, using right all these things, using your health, because some have health
Yes.
consequences as well.
Yes.
But communities is actually what we're trying to also build at AWE, is to have this space. These conversations are also building community, talking to people. People can come and have questions so that they don't feel alone, and to build that support network where the more information that is relevant and that can help, and also the more supporting people that can talk about difficult topics and
Yes.
not put it under the rug, and also build hope, like you mentioned, right? So there is hope that there are some solutions. There are some people that are working hard, including yourself, Bonnie. Really appreciate everything you're doing for all the communities of counselors. So as a supervisor, you're supervising counselors, therapists, clinicians. You're attending conference. You're a gracious guest at our podcast here. We really appreciate your wisdom and everything that you do to help families, couples, and individuals.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity today. And if people want to contact me, they can email me at openheartcouples, plural with an S, openheartcouples@gmail.com.
Thanks, Bonnie. Mark, any closing statement or observation?
Thank you, Bonnie. This has been really insightful for me, and I look forward to speaking to you again very, very soon.
Yes, it's been a joy, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank
Likewise. Thank you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and thanks, Bonnie and Mark. Have a great rest of the day and weekend.
Yes, thank
Bye.
you. Bye.